this?
So am I.
So am I. Welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us. I realized I should have sent a Twitter notice out a couple of hours ago. Let people know we're actually doing a show today. Had to cancel last week. Almost had to cancel today. We're having a crazy thunder and lightning storm outside. It's the first real one I can remember having in years, maybe in a decade or so. So pretty cool that we're looking at some horror stories tonight. And there's thunder and lightning outside. And just as I say thunder and lightning, look who we have. Mr. Antoine Dennison, welcome.
Evening, everyone. How are you doing, Joe?
I'm doing good, man. I was just saying, we're having like the first real thunder and lightning storm in about a decade, as far as I can remember. Yeah, not bad considering what we're going to be looking at tonight. Sets a little mood, at least out here and where I'm at.
Okay.
How you doing?
I'm doing all right. Scrambling, a lot of things on my plate, but I gotta stay on that schedule. It's the schedule that is. There was a quote by Gary Kasparov, and he said, and I'm loosely quoting him. He goes, "Persistence is a talent."
Mm-hmm.
Just sticking to it, and staying focused. That is a talent as well as in intrinsic ability. And I think
Kasparov being the all-time winningest chess grandmaster of all time, isn't he?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, right on. Well, I'm going to say hello to the people in the chat. Thank you all for joining us. Sorry I didn't send out a notification earlier. I usually try to do that. Let's bring up comments this week since I can do that. StreamYard didn't allow me to last time. Eric Weathers was first. Welcome, sir. D Geek Art. Good to see you, Elizabeth. Frog G. Mo Biggs. Thank you all
guys.
for joining. Oh, we just had a brief power outage. Can you still hear me, Antoine?
I can.
Okay, good. Right on. Simon 7. Good to see you, Mimigo. Arasaga, thank you, sir. Glad you like the hat. I decided to tonight's show with the stuff we're going to look at. I thought appropriate attire was called for. Danger Vanessa, welcome. Excuse me, Sumo Thori. Good to see you. Welcome to the show. Good stuff, Comic Skater. Good to see you, man. Sorry, guys. The cough was gone, and then just as soon as I went live, it started up again. One moment. Oh, I just love these COVID souvenirs. Simran says... Wait, go ahead.
Do you think you'll ever be back to 100%?
Oh, yeah, for sure. From what the doctors say, the two most common leftovers from COVID are a residual cough and memory, either memory fog or memory holes. And I had both, but both of them improve over time. And what they told me was it's usually the severity of COVID determines how long you have those residual leftover symptoms. So because I basically got as close as you can to death without staying there, they were telling me that my cough and kind of recovering lost memory might take anywhere from 6 to 9 months. But that's just a guess, as so many things with COVID are. But yeah, I'm definitely. I mean, I've made incredible strides as far as recovery goes, and basically the what they say is normal for recovery. If it's like here at this level, I'm somewhere, out the roof, up in the sky somewhere. They just keep writing impossible, for all of my numbers that I'm putting up, I guess you could say. So yeah, no, it's really good. It's really going well. Um, yeah, Simonon asked if I've got the steampunk pilgrim look going. Yes, indeed. Tonight we're going to look at some really cool stuff. There's some 19th century classic horror I want to get into tonight, and um, for a couple of reasons. One, because it's October and so many people seem to be in a Halloween spooky kind of mood, and so I thought it was appropriate. And then two is I found some. Antoine, once we play these videos, I guess you'll. Uh, sorry, Vanessa's making me laugh here. I got to put that up on the screen. Vanessa tells Simonon, "It's 2021. I can be as fabulous as I want." That's right, sister. I'm told that I can wear anything and be anything and identify any which way I want. Um, oh, excuse me, man. Hope that cough settles down. Um, so anyway, yes, as Vanessa says, I look like Dracula's mechanic. And Sumothora, yes, these are frilly sleeves. This would qualify as a Bancroft blouse if he were manly enough to pull this off. So if he happens to see this, yes, Mr. Bancroft, that is a silk gauntlet, and I just slapped you with it.
Yeah, I don't know
So
if Bancroft can pull that one off, Joe.
we'll see. The challenge has been given. We'll see if it's accepted. Uh, but yeah, so anyway, Antoine, these horror stories. One is an H.P. Lovecraft tale called Dagon. I found an animated audio drama, basically, and I think that what the guy did was just use motion graphics to animate this thing.
Yeah.
And I thought that this was a pretty cool way. And I've had this idea for a long time, but I thought, what if I could do like in between graphic novel releases for publishing? What if I could do basically a 21st century version of the old radio plays from the 30s, 40s, 50s,
Hmm.
um, but to go with the audio, I could also do video and do sort of like a motion graphic type of animation. Be very inexpensive to. Well, you okay over there?
Would you hear that sound? That was someone rubbing their motorcycle outside.
Oh, okay.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. I just want to make sure your wall wasn't caving in.
Right, but to your point, keep the appetite for your IP. Um, you know, in the you want to keep it in the mind of the audience and
Exactly.
keep their appetite wet for it.
Ex- exactly. And I already had ideas for how to do that, uh, but I wasn't sure on some of them how far to take it, and I wasn't sure because of time and expense that would be involved. But
Mhm.
what I saw what this guy's doing, it seems like I don't know what it would be as far as time requirements, but expense seems like it would be minimal as far as these things are concerned.
So you got to
So
get a quote first.
that's the
You
thing
know.
is I'm saying minimal, but that's a relative term to like actual animation,
Mhm.
and then it can go up to however much money however much
Uh,
money you could hope to raise. That's what it will cost.
if you, I can throw out we don't have to get into the nitty gritty of it, but I can tell you that they're going to evaluate by how many unique scenes there are, and
Hmm.
each one of those scenes is going to have a minimal amount of animation. And so, like for example, if you have a story, and I've seen some of these stories that we're going to take a look at, and I love them, and I think the animation works perfectly. It's very subtle,
Mm,
but it doesn't overwhelm the storytelling, and it's a fine art. But I think, for example, let's say you had a story that was an hour worth of narration, and then you had a scene swap every minute, and within each minute there were two or three unique animations.
yeah.
That would be a way that they could break down and give you a proper estimate. And it's all going to be done in vector. or it would be done in such a way that they would have, because vector is easier because it's easier to break up elements.
Hmm.
Like for example, imagine you have a character and he's seen from behind and he's opening a door, and then you can
Yeah.
kind of take the arm element and the door element and just kind of, and that's an easier way to do it instead of take traditional art and really break that up, because just compositing all those images is that in and of itself could break the bank. But and then of course then the question becomes, how can you quantify return? You
Yeah.
know, you
And
invest
that's
2,000. You know,
yeah, that's one of the things to consider as a publisher slash whatever you would call the guy who's trying to produce this stuff, in between books. I'm already into the cartoon business. I've gotten into figuring out how to do animation, working with a couple of
Snuggie.
working with a cool excuse me, couple of cool cats on that. Pedro Ang, I'm working with on some animation, and then I'm also working with Brian Urso, longtime comic skater, and I'm not you. I know you've been around long enough. I don't know if you were there when he was actually on Ethan's show, but he's got a band called Gideon's Mob, and he actually their band did like comic skate inspired music on this album that, if I remember correctly, was either all or much of the tracks were all superhero inspired, and so it was pretty cool. And so I'm working with him to compose the music for the trailer for the campaign, and so I'm kind of the go between right now between him as the composer and then Pedro's an animator, and we're gonna try
Mm-hmm.
to come up with some really cool stuff that way. But yeah, I mean, outside of the campaigns, there's the question of maintaining interest in the property. We try to maintain interest. As readers, we try to maintain interest with our creators by watching content that they produce, online. But then as creators, we're on the other side of that, trying to produce that content that people will find interesting and find worth their time. And so I'm trying to find ways to combine kind of the YouTube thing and other platforms that I've got kind of in the background, working on those. Combine that with the actual book
Mm-hmm.
IP, right? Try to bring those together. So, really looking forward to being able to show people when that stuff is ready. Um, but I want to just say welcome to everybody who has joined the show. Appreciate all you guys. Sorry I didn't send out the notification earlier. Um, Things got kind of crazy around here. And Rob the Replicator wants to know, Antoine, if you're a billionaire.
Yeah, I'm not curious. I'm not sure what that is all about, but please clarify, Rob, if you can. I'm just surprised he's actually watching.
You and me
Yeah,
both.
yeah.
uh, excuse me. So, okay, I'm gonna go ahead. I'm just kind of scrolling quickly through the chat. Hey, Mr. Von Stugel. So, thank you to everybody who's joining us. I was just saying a few minutes ago, my post-COVID cough had completely disappeared right before the show starts. We go live and it starts kicking up again. So, I'm gonna try to keep that in check. I just apologize ahead of time if the mic picks up any of it.
Well, you
Um,
can always hit that mute button.
Yes, sometimes it jumps out before I can hit the mute button. So I do try to mute as often as possible. So let me go ahead and bring up this animated audio drama, I guess you would call it. Excuse me, man. These things are just not giving me any warning. Um, Let me while I'm doing that, Antoine. Are you familiar with the work of H.P. Lovecraft at all?
I am very much so.
Okay. And so we're gonna watch Dagon, and I'll just anytime you want me to pause it to comment on this, just tell me, and I'll pause it, and I'll be looking for comments from the chat as well, because I'm familiar with Lovecraft, the writer, far more than I am his actual work. I have his work on my shelf. It's one of those where periodically
Mhm.
I'll just pull everything down, meaning to just binge read all of it, and I never get the time to do it. So I've already watched this, and I'm familiar with the story anyway. But just anything that jumps out at you, either from the standpoint of the horror story itself. And by the way, anyone who's not familiar with Lovecraft, um, he was active at the early 20th century, and he wrote about stuff that was kind of like late 19th century, early 20th century, and then he wrote about other stuff that was like farther back and then out into space, and he was all over the place. So um, I thought that for tonight I'd get a little I'd dress um, as to how someone in one of Lovecraft's stories might appear, at least as far as this nerd is concerned. So let's play the show. Let's share audio, and we'll light this rocket. So, guys in the chat, one besides just commenting on whatever you feel like talking about, I'm curious to see what you guys think about the visuals on this and the audio, and if this is something you guys would be interested in to see in to see Comicsgate people do. Like the Outliers is classic superhero storytelling, which we'll get in graphic novel format. But if you'd be interested in seeing animated stuff along the lines of what we're going to show, then please let me know. Can you hear that, Antoine? He says Dagon. You hear that?
I don't hear anything, Joe.
Okay, let's try this again. I tested this all before the show started. Oh, yep, it unchecked it. There we go. Try it again.
Dagon by H.P. Lovecraft. I am writing this under an appreciable mental strain, since by tomorrow I shall be no more. Penniless and at the end of my supply of the drug which alone makes life endurable, I can bear the torture no longer, and shall cast myself from this garret window into the squalid street below. Do not think from my slavery to morphine that I am a weakling or a degenerate. When you have read these hastily scrawled pages, you may guess, though never fully realize, why it is that I must have forgetfulness or death. It was in one of the most open and least frequented parts of the broad Pacific that the packet, of which I was supercargo, fell a victim to the German sea.
Rob is saying the voiceover is torture. Is that
it's a little saccharine, but
Yeah.
something I noticed about thus far we haven't seen any proper animation, but they've done some sliding transitions
Yep.
with the visuals and pushing and pulling things forward and back very subtly.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be that's a very economical way to kind of offer animation here.
That's what I'm thinking. Yep. While we got it paused, let's just check in with any other. Darren was saying, I thought because of the accent this was gonna suck. Mobig says, is this guy even British, bro? Yeah, don't threaten Vanessa. She'll drop the hammer. All right, let's get it going.
Raider. The Great War was then at its very beginning, and the ocean forces of the Hun had not completely sunk to their later degradation, so that our vessel was made a legitimate prize, whilst we of her crew were treated with all the fairness and consideration due to us as naval prisoners. So liberal, indeed, was the discipline of our captors, that 5 days after we were taken, I managed to escape alone in a small boat with water and provisions for a good length of time. When I finally found myself adrift and free, I had but little idea of my surroundings, Never a competent navigator, I could only guess vaguely by the sun and stars that I was somewhat south of the equator. Of the longitude I knew nothing, and no island or coastline was in sight. The weather kept fair, and for uncounted days I drifted aimlessly beneath the scorching sun, waiting either for some passing ship or to be cast on the shores of some habitable land. But neither ship nor land appeared, and I began to despair in my solitude upon the heaving vastness of unbroken blue.
Oh, I got it right when it tried to play the ad.
Oh.
So what I did before the show started, I played these all the way through, trying to get
Right.
through the ads because I didn't have time to upgrade prior to the show beginning, so we wouldn't have to deal with this. And I thought if I played it all the way through with the ads, then I could just play it again and not have them pop up again. No, they got me. So let's just mute for a second, and then we'll skip it.
Yeah, I think that. Well, how do you feel about the length on this in terms of what you would do with the format? Would you want to do something that long?
No, I'd want to start off shorter. Maybe something like 3 minutes,
Mm-hmm.
and just something to see what people's reactions would be, if they like it, if they don't, what would
Right.
they want to see different, that sort of thing, right? Part of it is so like not wasting their time if they don't like it, and then part of it from the business perspective is try to control costs, and let's not go too far down this road unless we see that it's actually going to be something that people really enjoy, and then we'll figure out where to go from there. I mean, the idea would be if people liked it, then I would want to try to set up some path for monetization eventually. But I really like the idea of having some kind of collaborative um, alpha and beta testing process where um, viewers are kind of almost having an associate producer role in deciding where it would go, if that makes sense.
Mm.
Um, Sumo is asking if this is British anime. No, it's there's an artist that I stumbled across who he works in all different media, including making comics. He's got some really nice looking hardcover graphic novels he's done, and excuse me, 1 second. Sorry about that. So he hired a British voice actor to do the narration, or maybe an American pretending to be a Brit. I'm not sure, but he hired a voice actor to do the narration. But the artist is the guy who did all of the illustrations and the animation. Okay, looks like we're caught up, and we'll start it up.
Happened whilst I slept. Its details I shall never know, for my slumber, though troubled and dream-infested, was continuous. When at last I awakened, it was to discover myself half sucked into a slimy expanse of hellish black mire, which extended about me in monotonous undulations as far as I could see, and in which my boat lay grounded some distance away. Though one might well imagine that my first sensation would be wonder at so prodigious and unexpected a transformation of scenery, I was in reality more horrified than astonished, for there was...
So I think with this one, Antoine, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit, but so far, my take on it is that I would think people would want a little more movement if this was stuff that we were doing kind of as supplemental material to the stories that we're publishing. I'm thinking it was something like this. They would probably want a little more action on the screen. Although at the same time, I really enjoyed the Christmas Carol radio play that John Malin put together several years ago, which was audio
Recall.
only and then just an animation with snow blowing. So I don't know. What's your take on it?
It's really hard to call unless you actually have the content. Like, for example, for this, let's take this for example. Um, the narrative is relatively rich. Um, the imagery, I think, is fine. I'm not necessarily wanting the pace of the visual elements or needing to see an accelerated degree of animation at the moment
Mm-hmm.
because it just kind of the animation is not a one-to-one relationship with what's being said. It is this there's a metaphoric relationship between the visual imagery and what's being spoken. I mean, it is they are following one another, the visual elements as and the narrative, but it's not
Yeah.
a one-to-one where every gesture or thought or like for example when the narrator mentions that he escapes on the boat, we don't see him lowering the boat and going through a lot of steps. We just kind of
Right.
see him kind of take a peek in on the sailors, and then the next shot we see him in the boat, and that's sufficient to move it forward. It would become almost tedious if you had too much animated in a
Mm-hmm.
limited animation style. So I think um, but having said that, I'm not aware of what you're going to. If I were to read your story
Mm-hmm.
and you said, "Hey, storyboard this out,"
Yeah.
then and I would say, "Okay, I could look at those storyboards and you get all the beats of it, and then I say, okay, this is a
Right.
tool we can use to determine what should or should not be animated." You know, but I wouldn't necessarily want to see this guy like floating on the boat with waves splashing and all that stuff. It's
Yeah.
unless it's in service to whatever the succession
What the
of
story beats
events.
are.
Right, right,
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good point. Sumo was saying he wouldn't even call this animation. It's just zooming. Yeah, this is
right.
basically a very stripped down, basic version of animating still images.
Yeah,
So,
he's exactly right. You're just zooming and they're
hmm
pushing and pulling layers. Like there was a splash that was kind of slowly growing, moving forward, and then something else receding to give us the perception of movement, but it's not true animation.
yeah.
You know.
Yeah, and Mo brings up a good point. He says the prose deserves a better reading. He's too focused on his bad accent and not enough on conveying the character's emotional reaction to events. Yeah, and so on if I were to try and put something like this together for the outliers, I would not want people to um, overact. I wouldn't want them to try and think of this as a quote unquote production. I would want them to just have fun with it. Trying to remember the readers are supposed to be having fun if they watch it and listen to it, and just try to be natural with it. And I don't know. I almost would be tempted to do something if I was going to do something like this, um, to do all the parts myself.
I don't know about that, Joe.
Because see, here's the thing: is that I wouldn't try to like for the female character misperception. I wouldn't try to exactly do a lady's voice. I think that would just be bad, and I wouldn't try to do completely different voices for all the characters. But if I was going to do it, like with audiobooks, how there could be a narrator, and if they do voices, it tends to be really just a variation on their own voice, and they don't try and
Right.
push it too far.
Well, like I said, I guess I'd have to hear it first and see how you did before I could tell you that it was. My first guess would be that you probably go like Fiverr or something like that and
Mm,
find a because there's one gentleman, his name is Roy Dotrice, and he narrated
yep.
all of the Game of Thrones books, and I love
Yep.
his work. And as you know, those books have children,
Yeah.
adults, old, young, and you never kind of cringe at his attempt to sound like a woman because he doesn't
Right.
try to sound like a woman. He
Right.
just, and it's also taking into consideration to how the story's written, so
hmm
he can just kind of use his own voice. Now he might lower it when he's really kind of doing a particularly aggressive voice, but when he does a female voice, it doesn't. You don't really think about it anymore, because you're just caught up in the storytelling of it.
Yeah. A good narrator for an audiobook will tend to just, like, if it's a male, like that guy is a character actor. He's been around for decades, and so he knows what it's like to be a real actor and not try to ham it up. So when
So you're not going to use your Macho Man voice?
No, nothing like that.
Yeah.
No, it's it's more like, I would imagine. I mean, you could tell me because you heard it, but I would imagine it's more like, pitch the voice up a little bit and then make the volumes up probably a little bit softer, and then read it. Rather
Well,
than not trying to talk like this.
yeah, you're going to lose it. Well,
Obviously,
give us
that's
a
horrible.
demonstration of what you think you could do with it.
Well, okay, so for example, if I were to pitch my voice up a bit and maybe talk a little bit softer than my normal voice, and then I actually tried to do it, as a part, then maybe it might work. Maybe not. Maybe it'd be horrible. I don't know.
Hmm.
As it says, sexy. Mr. Von Stugel says Rob wouldn't be perfect for this job. D Geek says, I like S.J. Thompson. He's got that deep, rumbling, classic Mr. Movie Phone type voice. Yeah, that would be nice. Yeah. Oh, and here's another good point: is she says you could just dip into the CG pool. People may have what you need voiceover wise. Yeah, that's actually my first thought, was to basically cast a radio play and treat it like a radio play, and then hire somebody to do illustrations and then animate the illustrations if we were going to go that route. But yeah, my very first idea when I was thinking about stuff to do along these lines was just to do like a radio play the way that Malin did. That's what gave me the idea. Okay, so to kind of skip you guys ahead in the story, basically the guy was adrift, and he drifted for a while, and then he lost consciousness, and when he woke up, he was able to walk out of the boat. The water was gone, and he sees this mysterious mound off in the distance.
Which turned out to be much higher than it had appeared from a distance, an intervening valley setting it out in sharper relief from the general surface. Too weary to ascend, I slept in the shadow of the hill. I know not why my dreams were so wild.
Okay, so he has these crazy dreams, and these monsters appear. Actually, let's let the monsters show up.
Cold perspiration, determined to sleep no more. Such visions as I had experienced were too much for me to endure again, and in the glow of the moon, I saw how unwise I had been to.
All right, so now, excuse me, now he's having second thoughts after he wakes up again. He's having his nightmares. And then he starts to go exploring.
Outcroppings of rock afforded fairly easy footholds for a descent, whilst after a drop of a few 100 feet, the declivity became very gradual. Urged on by an impulse which I cannot definitely analyze, I scrambled with difficulty down the rocks and stood on the gentler slope beneath, gazing into the Stygian depths where no light had yet penetrated.
Grammarly helps make your writing clear and concise.
Once, my attention was captured by a vast and singular object on the opposite slope, which rose steeply about 100 yards ahead of me. An object that gleamed whitely in the newly bestowed rays of the ascending moon.
So he goes and he checks this thing out, and it's got all kinds of carvings on it. And it seems like there's been some kind of civilization that was carving both writing and then sculptures or pictograms onto this thing.
such as fishes, eels, octopi, crustaceans, mollusks, whales, and the like. Several characters obviously represented marine things which are unknown to the modern world, but whose decomposing forms I had observed on the ocean-risen plain.
So he's scanning through, seeing what there is to see, and then it starts to get funky.
Intervening water, on account of their enormous size, was an array of bas reliefs whose subjects would have excited the envy of a Dor. I think that these things were supposed to depict men, at least a certain sort of men, though the creatures were shown disporting like fishes in the waters of some marine grotto, or paying homage at some monolithic shrine which appeared to be under the waves as well.
So he's trying to figure out who these fish people are. And he sees one here about the size of a whale. And he's kind of wonder what this is all about.
Churning to mark its rise to the surface, the thing slid into view above the dark waters. Vast, polyphemus-like, and loathsome, it darted to the monolith, about which it flung its gigantic scaly arms, the while it bowed its hideous head and gave vent to certain measured sounds. I think I went mad then. Of my frantic ascent of the slope and cliff, and of my delirious journey back to the stranded boat, I remember little. I believe I sang a great deal, and laughed oddly when I was unable to sing. I have indistinct recollections of a great storm some time after I reached the boat. At any rate, I knew that I heard peals of thunder and other tones which nature utters only in her wildest moods. When I came out of the shadows, I was in a San Francisco hospital, brought thither by the captain of the American ship which had picked up my boat in mid-ocean. In my delirium I had said much, but found that my words had been given scant attention.
So, Antoine, do you think that in the way that this is animated, the way that the story goes, do you think that I mean, we've talked about the guys narrating. I could use work, but as far as the mood of the story as it shifts from scene to scene, do you think that this type of animation is adequately capturing it? Do you think it's maybe could have been done better? What's your opinion?
Of course, you could always say something could be done better, but do I think this serves? I do. I'm looking at it and I'm trying to structure, say, like, for example, how many unique images have we seen? A couple dozen. And of those images, we've seen some modest transitioning from left to right, up, down, forward and back. I think this is done more economically than I would have guessed when before we started watching it. There are a few other animations or narrated animations of this order that have a greater degree of complexity that I've seen. This is actually rather humble, but I still think that it works, and I think it can be done economically. Like I said, we're only looking at a couple of dozen images, and each one of those images are, they're all digital. Right. And that what that allowed them to do is say, like, for example, when we saw the gentleman in profile, they took that same images and they just modified it, and they had his eyes squint there, So
of any land upheaval in the Pacific, my rescuers knew nothing, nor did I deem it necessary to insist upon a thing which I knew they could not believe.
So then the question for the reader is, did all this happen in the guy's mind, or did it happen in the real world?
Once
that's usually how he likes
sought out a celebration.
Yeah. What?
Did it jump to the next?
I think it did.
Right.
Celebrated ethnologist, and amused him with peculiar questions regarding the ancient Philistine legend of Dagon, the fish god. But soon perceiving that he was hopelessly conventional, I did not press my inquiries. It is at night, especially when the moon is gibbous and waning.
By the way, this moon is not gibbous and waning. This is a full moon.
This is one of the more economical shots for this animation here.
Yeah.
That I see the thing. I tried morphine, but the drug has given only transient surcease and has drawn me into its clutches as a hopeless slave. So now I am to end it all. Having written a full account for the information or the contemptuous amusement of my fellow men, often I ask myself if it could not all have been a pure phantasm.
Yeah, so now he's psychologically tortured. And
All Lovecraft's characters tend to be.
yeah, well, much like the writer himself. We'll get to the end here.
Bed, worshipping their ancient stone idols and carving their own detestable likenesses on submarine obelisks of water-soaked granite. I dream of a day when they may rise above the billows to drag down in their reeking talons the remnants of puny, war-exhausted mankind. Of a day when the land shall sink and the dark ocean floor shall ascend amidst universal pandemonium. The end is near. I hear a noise.
I do like how the artist handled the lighting in some of these scenes, especially where it's a close up on the narrator. I think that's pretty cool.
It appears he's starting from a middle tone and working his way toward dark and light, rather than saying just kind of drawing up with a coloring book style and filling it in. So
Right.
he is really thinking about light.
Yeah.
Oh, as of some immense, slippery body lumbering against it. It shall not find me. God, that hand! The window! The window!
Dun dun
That
dun.
was a bit much.
Yeah.
It takes me out of the story a little bit. You know, it's kind of like just rein it in.
Right. Yeah. So the narration, obviously, not the greatest, but
It's okay. I give it a C+.
yeah, I mean it does the trick, does the job. So as far as kind of if you were going to venture into trying to produce content that was in between graphic novel releases, or as a customer, if there was somebody who you knew were only going to produce one book a year, maybe at most 2 books a year, do you think that something like an audio drama or even one with some basic moving pictures, even if it's not full animation, do you think that's something that might be might help
Viable?
maintain your interest
If
during
you
the
have a
course of the year?
nice, crisp, short story, like let's hypothetically, like if I were to do it, and I would do it all myself. Maybe I wouldn't do the voiceovers, but I would say, okay, well, I've done the book here, and the next one won't be out for another 8 to 12 months. But I could conceivably take the first 6 pages, and because the way that the screen is structured, you'd want to take every page would say let's say it would be 3 panels, 3 widescreen panels.
Yeah.
And so maybe you have 8 unique visual instances. Each one of those visual instances, wait, what I said, 8 is 6 times 3, that's 8, 18. So 18, I'm sorry. And each one of those visual instances could take maybe 30 seconds while the narration is going across, maybe less. So in total, you're going to get maybe like a 5 minutes worth of content for the viewer. And I think that's a kind of a nice start. I wouldn't recommend doing anything longer than 5 minutes, at least
Right.
for just to see how people respond to it. But the thing about it is, I think that in order to make it, how we always talk about how Bancroft's animations are sticky and evergreen,
Yeah.
because they encapsulate certain ideas and they don't hinge necessarily on a particular incident at a particular time. They just kind of
Right.
like, it's an overview of kind of what, of how EVS kind of conceives of CG and such. So I would think it would have to be something that, yes, obviously you want it to serve the story, but it kind of has to transcend the story.
Yeah, I was
Something,
thinking
it
of
has to be
something.
sticky, it has to be shareable.
Yeah, I was thinking of doing something that kind of takes place in between the continuity that's covered in the books, and it would be something that is more like getting to know the characters better, so revealing a little more of their personalities, so
Supplemental
that
material then, so not
exactly,
actually story content. Okay.
exactly, supplemental, so that you don't have to watch it if you're only reading the books. But if you do watch it, you could get a sense of these characters' personalities without needing the lore that's attached to them.
So let me ask you this. This supplemental material, let's say someone who's never read the initial story is watching it. Are they is it going to be are they going to get as much or close to as much out of it as someone who is already familiar with your material? You know what I mean? Like, for
Um,
example, like, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, so
uh,
you have okay, so you tell the initial story, and you've
yeah,
offered that to the public, and they've
right,
enjoyed it. And
right,
then you say, you know what, I'm going to do this character piece on one of the characters in the story that we get a little bit more of their background or their motivation.
hmm,
And so you produce a 5 minute short that kind of delves into some of uh, the personal experiences of a given character. But someone who has not read the initial story,
yeah,
if because you really you want to keep the existing readers interested, but you also want to attract new readers.
exactly.
So I guess my question would be is that, um, can you conceive of something like that in such a way that it will not require foreknowledge of what's going on in the initial offering in order for someone to, sorry about that, in order for someone to get something out of these animated set
Yeah,
pieces?
yeah, it would be more or less just coming up with a very simple scenario that these characters would do something in, just to reveal who they are as people. And so it um, it would be something that would, in a sense, have a beginning, middle, and end. It would be a standalone story, if you will. This little bit of animation or audio drama. It would be additive for people who would be reading the books, but if somebody just discovered the animation or the audio drama and hadn't read the books, then if they were interested in that little part that they discovered, the books would give them more of whatever they liked about the story elements in that drama, that dramatic
Mhm.
piece.
Yeah, because it is a fine line, and that's a testament to more of the crafts of the writer, because like I said, in order for this to justify itself in terms of as a marketing tool, um, you really want to be able to have people say, I don't know what this is, but I'm definitely interested in kind of learning more.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly correct. That would be the business reason to justify doing it.
I was reading Mo's comment.
Oh, he's talking about the Wellerman song that Rob Arnold plays sometimes before his shows. Have you seen that before?
Yeah, I watch Rob's show all the time.
Okay, that's what I thought. But so if anybody hasn't seen it, I'll just put it in the chat. Um, you look up a song called "The Wellerman," and I think the guy that sang the original version of it, they went viral, is named Nathan Evans. It's on YouTube. Um, but yeah, so the story Dagon, um, I guess, had Mo thinking about the song "The Wellerman," so that's where his references were coming from. Um, so as far as your own project, Red Empires, are you thinking that you'll do the first book, see how it does, and then try to plan from there? Or are you trying to plan out, ahead of time, to to kind of sort of have a roadmap, if you will, and then depending on how the campaign does, you make adjustments as needed? What are you looking at
Um,
going into 2022?
well, the way I've structured it is basically a little bit of both, I suppose. I'm keeping the campaign humble enough that um, I'm, like I said, I'm going to it's going to be funded, mostly out of pocket. So
Mhm.
the expectations or the burden placed upon the campaign won't be precipitous. And the reason I have to do it that way is because I try to compartmentalize every element where I can say what's within my control, what's outside of my control. And I can't be
Mhm.
in a position where I say, well, I'm going to work on this, and if it doesn't fund, I won't do it. That's out
Yeah.
of the question. It will move forward. It will proceed in that manner. Now, one of the dangers, at least for me, is to kind of uh, try to be too overreaching. So my focus really is just to kind of put a page in front of me, complete the page, and and just kind of break things down into smaller and smaller units, so that I'm able to kind of just focus on tiny bits without getting preoccupied or distracted by the big picture.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where as long as I'm focusing on this small element, and once that's done, I go on to the next small element. I do that in steady succession. The big picture will take care of itself. But yeah, I'm not really planning on like for example, I have the story over the overarching story. I have how I'm going to break it down. I have all the chapters. I have all the themes and the story beats uh, laid out for at least probably about 6 books,
Okay.
because I would like it to be something that grows and blossoms into a viable commercial. Uh, you know, if I can produce a book a year or better
Hmm.
uh, for the next few years until I get through the whole story, and it can justify itself, that would be amazing.
Yeah.
If it can't sustain itself, I'll at least do one, maybe two, um, and then explore some of the other stories that I have. But like I said, each story is a self-contained thing, so it's kind of one of those element things where it's like, you know what, uh, what's if no one buys this, you'll at least be able to tell this one story, and it'll be a self-contained, complete story unto itself. And if
Right.
that appears to have legs, then you go on to the next thing. And if that appears to have legs, then you go on to the next thing. But it's kind of like I don't want to think about the next thing until I handle what's on my plate. And I'm not really. And now I do have like I said, I do have a strategy in terms of how I want to roll things out, in terms of how I want to keep engagement going. Um, I didn't necessarily think in terms of doing an animation, but like I said, something like that would be relatively easy for me to do.
Hmm.
Um, you know, but then the question would be, well, is it going to feed back into the core product? You
Yeah.
know, and and that's hard to quantify.
I know for
So,
me, it's a question of how does the first campaign do, and then if there's enough interest to justify doing anything other than another book, where do we go from there? So that's
yeah.
kind of where all of my thinking about this was coming from, is trying to maintain interest in between releases, assuming that there's enough interest there in the first one to keep the
Right.
thing going.
And of course, yeah, and that's can only be informed by how readers respond to the work.
Hmm.
Um, there's a hierarchy to that as well. You'll have your initial backers who support the work. Once they receive it, then the question becomes, are they sharing it? Because that's really, and it's not to sound, it's a delicate question because it can sound ungrateful. It's like if someone buys your work, that's more than what you can expect of most human beings,
Right.
So that's great in and of itself. But then the question becomes, how do I evaluate what the merit of the work is? There's one thing for people to say, well, I really enjoyed it. I thought that these were some interesting points, and these are other things that I didn't care for. And they might say, like, for example, giving you an evaluation of the work, but if someone, without being prompted or encouraged to do so, is out there sharing the work, that is really the gold standard of the merit of the product,
Mm-hmm.
because they're becoming evangelists for something that they said, this is so good, I've got to share it. And then presumably, or not presumably, but ideally, the people with whom they share it then share it. And then if something like that were to ever occur, that would make me say, or it should make the creator say, while I'm working on the next iteration or the next installment of this product, how can I keep, again, back to keeping the appetites wet for the content, because time is not our friend in this regard.
Yep.
There's so much content out there that people lose interest even in things that they love. Like believe it or not, there are people that have lost interest in the Song of Ice and Fire series because they haven't had an installment since they graduated from high school.
Right. Exactly.
So
Yeah.
that's when I would say, oh, you know what, people have developed or seem to be interested in this product, and while I'm working on the next installment, what I could possibly do is put together a short animation that can be out there and kind of tease a few things to come,
Right.
or develop some characters within the established story, that will, kind of give readers something to kind of uh, to play with while they're waiting for the next book to come out. But again, all of that is contingent upon how they respond to the first one. So it's like, for my part, nothing beyond as many as ideas that I have and could possibly do. I don't want to even think about anything beyond the last page of the first book.
Mm-hmm.
That's really where the rubber meets the road. Do this thing, keep it small, because if you start taking on too many things, and I do understand that the commercial considerations are important. You have to promote, you have to do all those things, but for me, what is certain is to do the work, rather than say kind of look beyond the work and think of what's the next thing and what's the next thing. That might be easy for me to do if I were in a position where I was like financing a project, because I
Right.
have to look at the big picture. But
Right.
in my position, it's kind of like, you really need to stay humble and just focus on producing each page and making sure each page is the best work you can do, and that it's consistent and the story is consistent across all the pages. And
Yeah, I
then
think
once,
that for publishers who are working with more than one story, that there at some point, and everybody has to decide this for themselves, but I think at some point you would have to think, okay, how do I go beyond whatever audience I've been able to attract for this one product or this one property, and how do I bring more people in from somewhere else? And that's where I think we've seen that animation, whether it's with Michael Bancroft's animations or with Kyle Ritter's animation with Star Blades, I think that's one thing that has shown it could potentially bring people from outside of our bubble, as it were, with CG, um, as a way to introduce people into what we're doing here. So
that's something that, I'm not. I have a bit of ambivalence about that, in the sense that what's going to make me interested in someone's comic or graphic novel is not a polished animation won't do that, because I'm not buying a polished animation. I'm buying the comic.
But if you
Now,
don't know the comic exists and the animation catches your eye, is that something that you think could get you to look at the graphic novel to see if you'd be interested in
it
buying it, or not really?
it's primarily contingent upon what ideas are being expressed in that animation. Like,
Hmm.
for example, if you have a superb animation, that in and of itself won't direct me to a comic. But if that animation is in service to interesting ideas
Yeah.
that are then expanded upon within the comic,
Yep.
then the animation will have done its job. But I think that uh, animate, but ultimately it's kind of like, well, whatever's what is my core product? My core product is a physical comic book, or whether it be digital or what have you. It's not animation, and that comic book is.
Oh, I think Antoine froze. So while we wait for him to hopefully come back, I'll answer. Yeah, Corey asked a good question. Are they buying a cartoon or a comic? And in this hypothetical situation, it would be that.
Who about concept. They care about.
Oh, looks like you're
Uh,
back. You froze there for a while.
you drop out, Joe?
Can you hear
Oh,
me?
was it me?
Yeah,
Okay, I'm sorry.
or at least
So
from my end, it
yeah,
seemed
I
like you
can hear you.
dropped out. Okay, cool. So I was just,
I did. I just noticed that I might have dropped out.
yeah, I was just saying that to answer Corey's question of are they buying a cartoon or a comic, which I think followed on from what you were saying,
Right.
and in so from where I was coming from, it would definitely be, for me specifically, I can't speak for anybody else, but for me specifically, if I were to do something like this, it would be trying to get people interested in the characters themselves who had never read the books, or people who read the books and like them and are waiting for the next book. This gives them more content with the characters that they're already interested in.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it would be very character driven, and it would just be a question of this is some additional content with those characters in it. Now, for the people who have no idea about the graphic novels, the hope would be they would see the animation and then being able to gently direct them over to the graphic novels, they would check it out and then maybe decide if they want to get into that.
So yeah, and I understand your point. And I'm not disagreeing with it or even necessarily challenging it. To
Mm-hmm.
me, what I think it is, concept drives everything. Whether that concept is expressed through an animation or through a or through a comic book or a graphic novel, what is the idea? Because in my view, it is the ideas which are going to drive interest. The vehicle, graphic novel,
Yeah.
animation, film, whatever, those are secondary to the core thesis, which is I have an idea, I have a concept that's so interesting that you're going to want to know more about it and read about it and learn about it and experience it and be part of it and speculate on it. It just happens to be in comic book form, and
Yeah.
I happen to be promoting it through animation. So my thing is, let's not get the cart before the horse. It's like
Right.
the thing that drives everything is the idea, the core idea. Now, like I said, and again, I know guys that are saying, "Hey, I don't give a hoot about your idea. I just care about awesome art." And there are some people that care about that. But I think if you're really talking about getting it to a broader audience, there are a lot of people that'll take mediocre art to be in politic about it and a great idea. I think that has more legs than a nothing idea drawn beautifully or animated beautifully. Because those things, yeah, it's nice, but they're more intellectual exercises. If I look at something that's aesthetically beautiful but doesn't say anything, then I
Yeah.
can just talk about, well, that was so well executed, and but if there are ideas that are compelling and really shift thought, it's like, yeah, you want good art to be in service to those ideas, but it's almost like again, it's in my view, it's all about the ideas, and those drive everything. And whatever the vehicle is, whether it be animation or the comics or what have you, I think it always has to start with, how am I reaching people with the idea,
Mm-hmm.
and how can I put animation in service to that?
Right.
And it doesn't matter how fancy the animation is, if the idea that it is serving does not come across to the viewer.
Yeah, no, it makes
Just
it makes sense. And Simonon7 says, "Remember those shorts that were released in the build-up for Blade Runner 2049? They were interesting, but I don't know if they were successful in getting more people to the movie theater." Yeah, I don't know. Great point.
And, that reminds me of the Matrix, the Animatrix they called it. And
Yeah.
I think it came out after just the first film,
Yep.
or prior to the other ones, and I loved those. And because they said, take the premise of what we've created with the Matrix and explore it in different ways.
Right.
And I thought, for me, it built up the gravitas of the core concept, and it made me want more.
Yep.
And there were some animations that were better or more to my liking, some were less to my liking, but the ideas that they were trying to convey is what really stuck with me, and what made me kind of a convert, for lack of a better word, And I've seen incredibly beautiful animations that didn't have anything to say, and yeah, it's nice, it's well executed, great CGI. There was one, I think it was called it was voiced by Ben Affleck, and it was done in the aughts. And it was a 3D CGI animation where they were talking about Gaia and all this stuff. And I remember it was so well executed, but it's like it just didn't land conceptually.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can recall what that was, but
I missed it. All right. Well, I think we'll end on this comment from Mo Biggs. He says, "You'll need a plan to get it in front of lots of eyeballs, just like you need for your Oh, this thing jumped on me. Let's get the first half of his comment. Mo says, "If you're doing this to keep your fans satisfied and think about your project, cool. If you're wanting it to expand your audience, you'll need a plan to get it in front of lots of eyeballs, just like you need for your campaign." Well said. 100% agree. And then Corey says, "I honestly think animation is cool if done well, but nothing beats a pretty picture from the comic." Yeah, that would be the thing, is that if there was going to be some sort of supplemental animated content, it would need to reflect what is in the book itself, because under this scenario, ideally you're trying to give additional content to people who have already bought at least the first book or a book, depending on where you are in your production, and then you're hoping that they'll buy the next one. And so this would be like holdover content. And then for new people, like Mo said, you would have to get that out in front of them so that they're even aware of it. And then if they watch it and they enjoy it, maybe you can direct them over to where they can buy the books.
Right. You want to spark and or cultivate interest. And the thing about it is, you can get in front of a few people, but it's almost like the audience has to do the heavy lifting, because, you can, if you get it in front of as many people as you can possibly can, that's not going to touch something going viral, And so it's like, how can I make this something where people want to share it? Because that's really what has to happen if it's going to serve whatever its intention,
Yeah, definitely. Simonon says, "Animatrix had some good ones, especially the ones that really expanded the background of the machine's insurgency. Others were just eye candy."
Right.
Yeah, agreed. So on that note, we're going to call it a show. Thank you, Antoine, for spending the hour with us. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And thank you so much to everyone in the chat who stopped by. Really appreciate you as well. Without you guys, this isn't a show. It's just a conversation between a couple of people. So thanks so much for spending time with us. And let's do it again next week. Bye.
Cheers.
Let's get out of here together.
After all, tomorrow is another day.
What a woman.